Welcome back, everybody. And hey, Jennifer, how are you?
Hi, Scott. I am doing well.
Good.
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, we talked about brainstorming in our last episode.
Yes.
We're in the middle of this wonderful series on presentation creation. And at this point in the process, our listeners have heard brainstorm for 8 minutes or 10 minutes. I was really obsessed with 8, but now they have a mess.
An absolute mess of ideas.
Yeah.
All these talking points that they want to make sure that they cover. However, audiences cannot take in all that information. So we're going to talk about organizing.
How would you guide them forward at this point?
It's taking a look at that brainstorming piece, all of those ideas that you've put together, and identifying only a couple of the most important ideas that you want your audience to walk away with from your presentation. And Scott, my belief is an audience, they're really only going to walk away with 2, maybe 3 ideas. I think 3 is really pushing it. I like the idea of 1 to 2. Yeah. However, that may not work with all presentations. So now we need to take that brainstorming mess and pull out 1 to 3 of the most important ideas you really want your audience to walk away with.
Yeah. I teach people in my workshops to take that mess. I think you'll remember I described people as using these little Post-its and there's ideas all over the place. One way to approach trying to distill the core messages key messages, I'm going to use the term core message for the single message you want to get across with this presentation. Yes. And key messages as those sort of subtopics, those underlying messages. To come up with these key messages, you can just quickly group the Post-its. Almost in a quick and brainstormy like fashion, you just start grabbing all those little ideas and grouping them together in ways that you see that they relate in some way. And then once you have a whole group of these ideas, a little cluster of ideas, they often will tell you, it's almost like, hey, little cluster, what are you trying to say? What's the key message behind you?
Love it.
That's a really great way to come up with key messages, to let them sort of arise out of the brainstorm.
Well, and Scott, we need to remember to be very patient during this process. I feel if we do it too quickly, we're going to overlook what's really important. And even though I know some presenters, they have a time crunch with creating a presentation. However, we can even go back to your 8-minute mark. Just take the time to breathe and really put those clusters together. Don't rush that process.
Yeah. I would even say, I'm reading a wonderful book by John Cleese on creativity. And he talks about letting your subconscious mind work while you sleep or while you go and do something else. So part of giving yourself time, if you can, is again, once you start grouping these and you start coming up with key messages, you may have to step away for a while.
Yes.
Sleep on it, literally sleep on it, and let your brain kind of work in the background, reapproach it the next day, and you may find, I have clarity. These are the key messages I absolutely want to get across, and they make great sense.
So now, if we have about 5 or 6 clusters, we're not able to deliver 6 main points to an audience. It's too much for them.
Yeah,
it's too much.
I don't know if I agree completely. But I see your point. I would say 5 is the number I often get, because I'm not just looking at them as discrete points, but they may actually tell a story.
Mm.
Sometimes
So
these key
it creates that
messages,
flow.
right.
Okay.
So you might not look at them as, key messages is I have to get this idea into you. It's more in the process of getting the core message into you. I'm going to go through this flow of ideas. Almost, again, I always find, I don't always find, but I often find that there's a story structure that you can begin to put together with these key messages so that there's a real nice flow to it.
Yep. I love that visual of threading the story throughout the presentation.
Yeah. But your point, well taken. Your point is absolutely well taken. People try to say, well, I only get a chance to talk to this group, once a year or something like that. I've got to get all this information to them. And I always tell people, you know what, put it in a document, send it to them, have a conversation. Stop trying to stuff your presentation with information, because people can't sit there and retain all that stuff. It's not the right medium and the right way to do it. You have to go back to your core message, how you want them to feel, and stay focused on that. And you'll find that this idea of, God, is half an hour going to be enough, will turn into the opposite, going, why would I need half an hour to get people to this point I want to?
Yes, because if the message is truly clear and succinct, you probably don't need that half hour.
Yeah, no. You're just trying to get an idea into people's
Yes. Well, and also you're sharing what is most important, because that's what the audience wants anyway. They want to hear what is most important, what's going to give them the most value, and not all that added information, mess.
Well, and that's such a great segue into this one option I wanted to offer everybody. And that is, I feel for most presentations that it doesn't serve you well to rehearse. It doesn't serve you well to take those key messages and decide specifically what order you're going to go through those messages in, and to rehearse it over and over like you're putting on a performance. Because to know what the audience needs and what's important to them and relevant to them means being somewhat impromptu, I think, giving yourself the freedom to, as you go through a presentation, sometimes leave some of the key messages behind if you don't feel it's relevant in that moment to the audience. This requires you to think of a presentation more along the lines of a conversation. And I really find that most presentations should be that way.
Well, and it also, if that's the mindset of I need to be flexible while I give this presentation, when we are interrupted, which happens all the time when we present, let's say you're interrupted by a leader or a colleague, and they can flip your presentation upside down and take it down a different path. We need to be able to pivot.
Yeah.
And when we pivot to the needs of the audience, that's what creates a great presentation. So if we hang on too tightly to this script and I have to cover all of these points, again, it's the presenter. They're only making it about themselves. They're not putting their audience first.
All right. We've said a whole lot of stuff.
And there's so much more to say.
There's a lot to say at this step, but we don't want to drag this out too long. What can we do to summarize this for our audience? What do you want them to leave focused on?
Having that mindset when preparing and giving the presentation to keep it flexible. Don't hang on to this agenda too tightly, and be prepared to pivot to the needs of the audience. And that's why it's so important that we watch our audience, especially when it's virtual. We have to keep our eyes on our audience and how they are responding to the message so that we know when we need to pause and pivot to their needs.
Yeah, I love that. And I would go even a step further as saying, look for them as road signs. I mean, you want to know what's relevant to your audience. And the one assumption I think people go in to presentations with far too often is that I can know the audience enough to come up with a scripted like thing where I know exactly what I'm going to say. I'll rehearse it a million times and then deliver it, and it's going to be great. When people change over time very quickly, and that audience in front of you is not the same they were yesterday or the day before. So knowing what they need in that moment, knowing what's relevant to them and meaningful to them in that moment is really important if you're going to be great. And if you're going to do that, you're right. You have to know the key messages that you intend to get across, but you have to be willing to approach them in whatever order unfolds with the conversation. And you have to be willing to let go of content in that moment too, and just deliver what the audience needs.
And that all of this goes back to putting your audience first.
Yep.
Everything we're saying is about putting them first.
Always.
Always.
Well, now, next episode, we have our first official guest, Amy Wong from Always on Purpose. And she's awesome, great energy. And she's going to be talking to us about trust and change and transformation in people in the context of communication.
Yes. And also how important it is to have trust within a team as a leader, especially when needing to convey difficult messages during a presentation.
That's right. The next time we get back to the presentation creation series, we're going to talk about visuals, getting into the mode of, do I need visuals? And if I do, what are those visuals going to look like? What's the process for approaching making visuals to accompany your presentation?
Yes, to complement the presentation.
That's
and
right.
Making sure that the visuals highlight the key points.
That's right. All right, everybody.
Beautiful. Okay.
Thank you. See you later.
Have a good one.